Section 1 of the Metamorphoses by Ovid, translated by Frank Justice Miller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Thomas Copeland. Book 1. My mind is bent to tell of bodies changed into new forms. Ye gods, for you yourselves have wrought the changes, breathe on these my undertakings, and bring down my song in unbroken strains from the world's very beginning, even unto the present time. Before the sea was, and the lands, and the sky that hangs over all, the face of nature showed alike in her whole round, which state have men called chaos, a rough unordered mass of things, nothing at all save lifeless bulk and warring seeds of ill-matched elements heaped in one. No sun as yet shone forth upon the world, nor did the waxing moon renew her slender horns. Not yet did the earth hang poised by her own weight in the circumambient air, nor had the ocean stretched her arms along the far reaches of the lands. And though there was both land and sea and air, no one could tread that land nor swim that sea, and the air was dark. No form of things remained the same. All objects were at odds, for within one body cold things strove with hot, and moist with dry, soft things with hard, things having weight with weightless things. God, or kindlier nature, composed this strife, for he rent asunder land from sky, and sea from land, and separated the ethereal heavens from the dense atmosphere. When thus he had released these elements, and freed them from the blind heap of things, he set them each in its own place, and bound them fast in harmony. The fiery, weightless element that forms heaven's vault leaped up and made place for itself upon the topmost height. Next came the air in lightness and in place. The earth was heavier than these, and, drawing with it the grosser elements, sank to the bottom by its own weight. The streaming water took the last place of all, and held the solid land confined in its embrace. When he, whoever of the gods it was, had thus arranged in order and resolved that chaotic mass, and reduced it, thus resolved, to cosmic parts, he first moulded the earth into the form of a mighty ball, so that it might be of like form on every side. Then he bade the waters to spread abroad, to rise in waves beneath the rushing winds, and fling themselves around the shores of the encircled earth. Springs, too, and huge stagnant pools and lakes he made, and hemmed down-flowing rivers within their shelving banks, whose waters, each far remote from each, are partly swallowed by the earth itself, and partly flow down to the sea, and being thus received into the expanse of a freer flood, beat now on shores instead of banks. Then did he bid plains to stretch out, valleys to sink down, woods to be clothed in leafage, and the rock-ribbed mountains to arise. And as the celestial vault is cut by 2 zones on the right and 2 on the left, and there is a 5th zone between, hotter than these, so did the providence of God mark off the enclosed mass with the same number of zones, and the same tracts were stamped upon the earth. The central zone of these may not be dwelt in by reason of the heat. Deep snow covers 2. 2 he placed between, and gave them temperate climate, mingling heat with cold. The air hung over all, which is as much heavier than fire as the weight of water is lighter than the weight of earth. There did the Creator bid the mists and clouds to take their place, and thunder, that should shake the hearts of men, and winds, which with the thunderbolts make chilling cold. To these also the world's Creator did not allot the air, that they might hold it everywhere. Even as it is, they can scarce be prevented, though they control their blasts, each in his separate tract, from tearing the world to pieces. So fiercely do these brothers strive together. But Eurus drew off to the land of the dawn and the realms of Araby, and where the Persian hills flush beneath the morning light. The western shores, which glow with the setting sun, are the place of Zephyrus, while bristling Boreas betook himself to Scythia in the farthest north. The land far opposite is wet with constant fog and rain, the home of Auster, the south wind. Above these all he placed the liquid, weightless ether, which has naught of earthly dregs. Scarce had he thus parted off all things within their determined bounds, when the stars, which had long been lying hid, crushed down beneath the darkness, began to gleam throughout the sky. And that no region might be without its own forms of animate life, the stars and divine forms occupied the floor of heaven. The sea fell to the shining fishes for their home, earth received the beasts, and the mobile air the birds. A living creature of finer stuff than these, more capable of lofty thought, one who could have dominion over all the rest, was lacking yet. Then man was born. Whether the God who made all else, designing a more perfect world, made man of his own divine substance, or whether the new earth, but lately drawn away from heavenly ether, retained still some elements of its kindred sky, that earth which the son of Iapetus mixed with fresh running water, and moulded into the form of the all-controlling gods. And though all other animals are prone, and fix their gaze upon the earth, he gave to man an uplifted face, and bade him stand erect, and turn his eyes to heaven. So then the earth, which had but lately been a rough and formless thing, was changed and clothed itself with forms of men, before unknown. Golden was that first age, which, with no one to compel, without a law, of its own will, kept faith and did the right. There was no fear of punishment, no threatening words were to be read on brazen tablets, no suppliant throng gazed fearfully upon its judge's face, but without judges lived secure. Not yet had the pine tree, felled on its native mountains, descended thence into the watery plain to visit other lands. Men knew no shores except their own. Not yet were cities begirt with steep moats. There were no trumpets of strait, no horns of curving brass, no swords or helmets. There was no need at all of armed men, for nations, secure from war's alarms, passed the years in gentle ease. The earth herself, without compulsion, untouched by hoe or plowshare, of herself gave all things needful. And men, content with food which came with no one seeking, gathered the arbute fruit, strawberries from the mountain sides, cornel cherries, berries hanging thick upon the prickly bramble, and acorns fallen from the spreading tree of Jove. Then spring was everlasting, and gentle zephyrs with warm breath played with the flowers that sprang unplanted. Anon the earth untilled brought forth her stores of grain, and the fields, though unfallowed, grew white with the heavy bearded wheat. Streams of milk and streams of sweet nectar flowed, and yellow honey was distilled from the verdant oak. After Saturn had been banished to the dark land of death, and the world was under the sway of Jove, the silver race came in, lower in the scale than gold, but of greater worth than yellow brass. Jove now shortened the bounds of the old-time spring, and through winter, summer, variable autumn, and brief spring, completed the year in 4 seasons. Then first the parched air glared white with burning heat, and icicles hung down congealed by freezing winds. In that age men first sought the shelter of houses. Their homes had heretofore been caves, dense thickets, and branches bound together with bark. Then first the seeds of grain were planted in long furrows, and bullocks groaned beneath the heavy yoke. Next after this, and third in order, came the brazen race, of sterner disposition, and more ready to fly to arms, savage, but not yet impious. The age of hard iron came last. Straightway all evil burst forth into this age of baser vein. Modesty and truth and faith fled the earth, and in their place came tricks and plots and snares, violence and cursed love of gain. Men now spread sails to the winds, though the sailor as yet scarce knew them. and keels of pine, which long had stood upon high mountain sides, now leaped insolently over unknown waves, and the ground, which had hitherto been a common possession like the sunlight and the air, the careful surveyor now marked out with long-drawn boundary line. Not only did men demand of the bounteous fields the crops and sustenance they owed, but they delved as well into the very bowels of the earth, and the wealth which the Creator had hidden away and buried deep amidst the very Stygian shades was brought to light, wealth that pricks men on to crime. And now baneful iron had come, and gold more baneful than iron. War came, which fights with both, and brandished in its bloody hands the clashing arms. Men lived on plunder. Guest was not safe from host, nor father-in-law from son-in-law. Even among brothers 'twas rare to find affection. The husband longed for the death of his wife, she of her husband. Murderous stepmothers brewed deadly poisons, and sons inquired into their fathers' years before the time. Piety lay vanquished, and the maiden Astrea, last of the immortals, abandoned the blood-soaked earth. And that high heaven might be no safer than the earth, they say that the giants essayed the very throne of heaven, piling huge mountains one on another, clear up to the stars. Then the Almighty Father hurled his thunderbolts, shattered Olympus, and dashed Pelion down from underlying Ossa. When those dread bodies lay o'erwhelmed by their own bulk, they say that Mother Earth, drenched with their streaming blood, informed that warm gore anew with life, and, that some trace of her former offspring might remain, she gave it human form. But this new stock too proved contemptuous of the gods, very greedy for slaughter and passionate. You might know that they were sons of blood. When Saturn's son from his high throne saw this, he groaned, and recalling the infamous revels of Lycaon's table, a story still unknown because the deed was new, he conceived a mighty wrath worthy of the soul of Jove, and summoned a council of the gods. Naught delayed their answer to the summons. There is a highway, easily seen when the sky is clear. 'Tis called the Milky Way, famed for its shining whiteness. By this way the gods fare to the halls and royal dwelling of the mighty Thunderer. On either side, the palaces of the gods of higher rank are thronged with guests through folding doors flung wide. The lesser gods dwell apart from these. Fronting on this way, the illustrious and strong heavenly gods have placed their homes. This is the place which, if I may make bold to say it, I would not fear to call the Palatia of high heaven. So when the gods had taken their seats within the marble council chamber, the king himself, seated high above the rest and leaning on his ivory sceptre, shook thrice and again his awful locks, wherewith he moved the land and sea and sky. Then he opened his indignant lips, and thus spoke he: I was not more troubled than now for the sovereignty of the world, when each one of the serpent-footed giants was in act to lay his 100 hands upon the captive sky. For although that was a savage enemy, their whole attack sprung from one body and one source. But now, wherever old ocean roars around the earth, I must destroy the race of men. By the infernal streams that glide beneath the earth through Stygian groves, I swear that I have already tried all other means. But that which is incurable must be cut away with the knife, lest the untainted part also draw infection. I have demigods, rustic divinities, nymphs, fauns, and satyrs, and sylvan deities upon the mountain slopes. Since we do not yet esteem them worthy the honor of the place in heaven, let us at least allow them to dwell in safety in the lands allotted them. Or do you think that they will be safe when against me, who wield the thunderbolt, who have and rule you as my subjects, Lycaon, well known for savagery, has laid his snares? All trembled, and with eager zeal demanded him who had been guilty of such bold infamy. So when an impious band was mad to blot out the name of Rome with Caesar's blood, the human race was dazed with a mighty fear of sudden ruin, and the whole world shuddered in horror. Nor is the loyalty of thy subjects, Augustus, less pleasing to thee than that was to Jove. After he by word and gesture had checked their outcry, all held their peace. When now the clamour had subsided, checked by his royal authority, Jove once more broke the silence with these words: "He has indeed been punished, have no care for that. But what he did, and what his punishment, I will relate. An infamous report of the age had reached my ears. Eager to prove this false, I descended from high Olympus, and as a god disguised in human form, travelled up and down the land. It would take too long to recount how great impiety was found on every hand. The infamous report was far less than the truth. I had crossed my Nala, bristling with the lairs of beasts, Cyllene, and the pine groves of chill Lycius. Thence I approached the seat and inhospitable abode of the Arcadian king, just as the late evening shades were ushering in the night. I gave a sign that a god had come, and the common folk began to worship me. Lycaon at first mocked at their pious prayers, and then he said, "I will soon find out, and that by a plain test, whether this fellow be god or mortal, nor shall the truth be at all in doubt." He planned that night, while I was heavy with sleep, to kill me by an unexpected murderous attack. Such was the experiment he adopted to test the truth. And not content with that, he took a hostage who had been sent by the Molossian race, cut his throat, and some parts of him still warm with life he boiled, and others he roasted over the fire. But no sooner had he placed these before me on the table, than I with my avenging bolt o'erthrew the house upon its master and on his guilty household. The king himself flies in terror, and, gaining the silent fields, howls aloud, attempting in vain to speak. His mouth of itself gathers foam, and with his accustomed greed for blood, he turns against the sheep, delighting still in slaughter. His garments change to shaggy hair, his arms to legs. He turns into a wolf, and yet retains some traces of his former shape. There is the same grey hair, the same fierce face, the same gleaming eyes, the same picture of beastly savagery. One house has fallen, but not one house alone has deserved to perish. Wherever the plains of earth extend, wild fury reigns supreme. You would deem it a conspiracy of crime. Let them all pay, and quickly too, the penalties which they have deserved. So stands my purpose." When he had done, some proclaimed their approval of his words, and added fuel to his wrath, while others played their parts by giving silent consent. And yet they all grieved over the threatened loss of the human race, and asked what would be the state of the world bereft of mortals? Who would bring incense to their altars? Was he planning to give over the world to the wild beasts to despoil? As they thus questioned, their king bade them be of good cheer, for the rest should be his care. For he would give them another race of wondrous origin, far different from the first. And now he was in act to hurl his thunderbolts against the whole world, but he stayed his hand in fear lest perchance the sacred heavens should take fire from so huge a conflagration, and burn from pole to pole. He remembered also that 'twas in the fates that a time would come when sea and land, the unkindled palace of the sky, and the beleaguered structure of the universe should be destroyed by fire. And so he laid aside the bolts which Cyclopean hands had forged. He preferred a different punishment, to destroy the human race beneath the waves, and to send down rain from every quarter of the sky. Straightway he shuts the north wind up in the cave of Aeolus, and all blasts soever that put the clouds to flight. But he lets the south wind loose, Forth flies the south wind with dripping wings, his awful face shrouded in pitchy darkness. His beard is heavy with rain, water flows in streams down his hoary locks, dark clouds rest upon his brow, while his wings and garments drip with dew. And when he presses the low-hanging clouds with his broad hands, a crashing sound goes forth, and next the dense clouds pour forth their rain. Iris, the messenger of Juno, clad in robes of many hues, draws up water and feeds it to the clouds. The standing grain is overthrown. The crops which have been the object of the farmer's prayers lie ruined, and the hard labor of the tedious year has come to naught. The wrath of Jove is not content with the waters from his own sky. His sea-god brother aids him with auxiliary waves. He summons his rivers to council. When these have assembled at the palace of their king, he says, "Now is no time to employ a long harangue. Put forth all your strength, for there is need. Open wide your doors, away with all restraining dikes, and give full rein to all your river steeds." So he commands, and the rivers return, uncurb their mountains' mouths, and in unbridled course go racing to the sea. Neptune himself smites the earth with his trident. She trembles, and at the stroke flings open wide a way for the waters. The rivers overleap all bounds and flood the open plains, and not alone orchards, crops, and herds, men and dwellings, but shrines as well, and their sacred contents do they sweep away. If any house has stood firm, and has been able to resist that huge misfortune undestroyed, still do the overtopping waves cover its roof, and its towers lie hid beneath the flood. And now the sea and land have no distinction. All is sea, but a sea without a shore. Here one man seeks a hilltop in his flight, another sits in his curved skiff, plying the oars where lately he has ploughed. One sails over the fields of grain or the roof of his buried farmhouse, and one takes fish caught in the elm tree's top. And sometimes it chanced that an anchor was embedded in a grassy meadow, or the curving keels brushed over the vineyard tops. And where but now the slender goats had browsed, the ugly sea-calves rested. The Nereids are amazed to see beneath the waters groves and cities and the haunts of men. The dolphins invade the woods, brushing against the high branches, and shake the oak trees as they knock against them on their course. The wolf swims among the sheep, while tawny lions and tigers are borne along by the waves. Neither does the power of his lightning stroke avail the boar, nor his swift limbs the stag, since both are alike swept away by the flood. And the wandering bird, after long searching for a place to alight, falls with weary wings into the sea. The sea in unchecked liberty has now buried all the hills, and strange waves now beat upon the mountain peaks. Most living things are drowned outright. Those who have escaped the water, slow starvation at last o'ercomes through lack of food. The land of Phocis separates the Boeotian from the Aegean fields, a fertile land, while still it was a land. But at that time it was but a part of the sea, a broad expanse of sudden waters. There Mount Parnassus lifts its 2 peaks skyward, high and steep, piercing the clouds. When here Deucalion and his wife, born in a little skiff, had come to land, for the sea had covered all things else. They first worshipped the Corician nymphs and the mountain deities, and the goddess, fate-revealing Themis, who in those days kept the oracles. There was no better man than he, none more scrupulous of right, nor than she was any woman more reverent of the gods. When now Jove saw that the world was all one stagnant pool, and that only one man was left from those who were but now so many thousands, and that but one woman too was left, both innocent and both worshippers of God, he rent the clouds asunder, And when these had been swept away by the north wind, he showed the land once more to the sky, and the heavens to the land. Then, too, the anger of the sea subsides, when the sea's great ruler lays by his three-pronged spear and calms the waves. And calling sea-hued Triton, showing forth above the deep his shoulders thick o'ergrown with shellfish, he bids him blow into his loud-resounding conch, and by that signal to recall the floods and streams. He lifts his hollow-twisted shell, which grows from the least and lowest to a broad swelling whorl, the shell which, when in mid-sea it has received the Triton's breath, fills with its notes the shores that lie beneath the rising and the setting sun. So then, when it had touched the sea-god's lips wet with his dripping beard, and sounded forth the retreat which had been ordered, 'twas heard by all the waters both of land and sea, and all the waters by which 'twas heard it held in check. Now the sea has shores, the rivers, bank full, keep within their channels. The floods subside, and hill-tops spring into view. Land rises up, the ground increasing as the waves decrease. And now at length, after long burial, the trees show their uncovered tops, whose leaves still hold the slime which the flood has left. The world was indeed restored, but when Deucalion saw that it was an empty world, and that deep silence filled the desolated lands, he burst into tears, and thus addressed his wife: "O sister, O my wife, O only woman left on earth, you whom the ties of common race and family," note Petrulius Origo, see line 390. Deucalion and Pyrrha were cousins, a relationship which on the part of the woman is sometimes expressed by sorrow. Return to text. "You whom the ties of common race and family, whom the marriage couch has joined to me, and whom now our very perils join, of all the lands which the rising and the setting sun behold, we too are the throng. The sea holds all the rest, and even this hold which we have upon our life is not as yet sufficiently secure. Even yet the clouds strike terror to my heart. What would be your feelings now, poor soul, if the fates had willed that you be rescued all alone? How would you bear your fear alone? Who would console your grief? For be assured that if the sea held you also, I would follow you, my wife, and the sea should hold me also. O would that by my father's arts I might restore the nations, and breathe, as did he, the breath of life into the moulded clay. But as it is, on us two only depends the human race. Such is the will of heaven, and we remain sole samples of mankind." He spoke, and when they had wept a while, they resolved to appeal to the heavenly power, and seek his aid through sacred oracles. Without delay, side by side, they went to the waters of Cephisus' stream, which, while not yet clear, still flowed within their familiar banks. From this they took some drops, and sprinkled them on head and clothing. So having done, they bent their steps to the goddess's sacred shrine, whose gables were still discoloured with foul moss, and upon whose altars the fires were dead. When they had reached the temple steps, they both fell prone upon the ground, and with trembling lips kissed the chill stone, and said, "If deities are appeased by the prayers of the righteous, if the wrath of the gods is thus turned aside, O Themis, tell us by what means our race may be restored, and bring aid, O most merciful, to a world o'erwhelmed." The goddess was moved, and gave this oracle: "Depart hence, and with veiled heads and loosened robes throw behind you as you go the bones of your great mother." Long they stand in dumb amaze, and first Pyrrha breaks the silence, and refuses to obey the bidding of the goddess. With trembling lips she prays for pardon, but dares not outrage her mother's ghost by treating her bones as she is bid. Meanwhile they go over again the words of the oracle, which had been given so full of dark perplexities, and turn them over and over in their minds. At last Prometheus' son comforts the daughter of Epimetheus with reassuring words. Either my wit is at fault, or else, oracles are holy and never counsel guilt, our great mother is the earth, and I think that the bones which the goddess speaks of are the stones in the earth's body. 'Tis these that we are bidden to throw behind us. Although Pyrrha is moved by her husband's surmise, yet hope still wavers, so distrustful are they both as to the heavenly command. But what harm will it do to try? They go down, veil their heads, ungird their robes, and throw stones behind them, just as the goddess had bidden. And the stones, who would believe it unless ancient tradition vouched for it, began at once to lose their hardness and stiffness, to grow soft slowly, and softened to take on form. Then, when they had grown in size and become milder in their nature, a certain likeness to the human form indeed could be seen, still not very clear, but such as statues just begun out of marble have, not sharply defined, and very like roughly blocked out images. That part of them, however, which was earthy and damp, with slight moisture, was changed to flesh. But what was solid and incapable of bending became bone. That which was but now veins remained under the same name, and in a short time, through the operation of the divine will, the stones thrown by the man's hand took on the form of men, and women were made from the stones the woman threw. Hence come the hardness of our race, and our endurance of toil, and we give proof from what origin we are sprung. As to the other forms of animal life, the earth spontaneously produced these, of divers kinds, after that old moisture remaining from the flood had grown warm from the rays of the sun. The slime of the wet marshes swelled with heat, and the fertile seeds of life, nourished in that life-giving soil as in a mother's womb, grew, and in time took on some special form. So when the seven-mouthed Nile has receded from the drenched fields, and has returned again to its former bed, and the fresh slime has been heated by the sun's rays, farmers, as they turn over the lumps of earth, find many animate things, and among these some, but now begun, are upon the very verge of life. Some are unfinished and lacking in their proper parts, and ofttimes in the same body one part is alive, and the other still nothing but raw earth. For when moisture and heat unite, life is conceived, and from these two sources all living things spring. And though fire and water are naturally at enmity, still heat and moisture produce all things, and this inharmonious harmony is fitted to the growth of life. When therefore the earth, covered with mud from the recent flood, became heated up by the hot and genial rays of the sun, she brought forth innumerable forms of life. In part she restored the ancient shapes, and in part she created creatures new and strange. She indeed would have wished not to do so, but thee also she then bore, thou huge Python, thou snake unknown before, who wast a terror to new created men, so huge a space of mountain-side didst thou fill. This monster the god of the glittering bow destroyed with arms never before used except against does and wild she-goats, crushing him with countless darts, well-nigh emptying his quiver, till the creature's poisonous blood flowed from the black wounds. And, that the fame of his deed might not perish through lapse of time, he instituted sacred games, whose contests throngs beheld, called Pythian, from the name of the serpent he had overthrown. At these games, youth who had been victorious in boxing, running, or the chariot race, received the honour of an oaken garland. For as yet the laurel tree was not, and Phoebus was wont to wreathe his temples, comely with flowing locks, with a garland from any tree. Now, the first love of Phoebus was Daphne, daughter of Peneus, the river god. It was no blind chance that gave this love, but the malicious wrath of Cupid. Delian Apollo, while still exulting over his conquest of the serpent, had seen him bending his bow with tight-drawn string, and had said, "What hast thou to do with the arms of men, thou wanton boy? That weapon befits my shoulders, for I have strength to give unerring wounds to the wild beasts, my foes, and have but now laid low the Phaeton, swollen with countless darts, covering whole acres with plague-engendering form. Do thou be content with thy torch to light the hidden fires of love, and lay not claim to my honours." And to him Venus' son replied, "Thy dart may pierce all things else, Apollo, but mine shall pierce thee, and by as much as all living things are less than deity, by so much less is thy glory than mine." So saying, he shook his wings, and, dashing upward through the air, quickly alighted on the shady peak of Parnassus. There he took from his quiver 2 darts of opposite effect. One puts to flight, the other kindles the flame of love. The one which kindles love is of gold, and has a sharp, gleaming point. The other is blunt and tipped with lead. This last the god fixed in the heart of Peneus' daughter, but with the other he smote Apollo, piercing even unto the bones and marrow. Straightway he burned with love, but she fled the very name of love, rejoicing in the deep fastnesses of the woods, and in the spoils of beasts which she had snared, vying with the virgin Phoebe. A single fillet bound her locks, all unarranged. Many sought her, but she, averse to all suitors, impatient of control and without thought for man, roamed the pathless woods, nor cared at all what hymen, love, or wedlock might be. Often her father said, "Daughter, you owe me a son-in-law," and often, "Daughter, you owe me grandsons." But she, hating the wedding torch as if it were a thing of evil, would blush rosy red over her fair face, and clinging around her father's neck with coaxing arms, would say, "Oh, father dearest, grant me to enjoy perpetual virginity." Her father has already granted this to Diana. He, indeed, yielded to her request. But that beauty of thine, Daphne, forbade the fulfilment of thy desire, and thy form fitted not with thy prayer. Phoebus loves Daphne at sight, and longs to wed her, and what he longs for, that he hopes, and his own gifts of prophecy deceive him. And as the stubble of the harvested grain is kindled, as hedges burn with the torches which some traveller has chanced to put too near, or has gone off and left at break of day, so was the god consumed with flames. So did he burn in all his heart, and feed his fruitless love on hope. He looks at her hair, hanging down her neck in disarray, and says, "What if it were arrayed?" He gazes at her eyes, gleaming like stars. He gazes upon her lips, which but to gaze on does not satisfy. He marvels at her fingers, hands, and wrists, and her arms, bare to the shoulder. And what is hid he deems still lovelier. But she flees him swifter than the fleeting breeze, nor does she stop when he calls after her, "O nymph, O Peneus' daughter, stay! I who pursue thee am no enemy. O stay! So does the lamb flee from the wolf, the deer from the lion. So do doves on fluttering wing flee from the eagle. So every creature flees its foes, but love is the cause of my pursuit. Ah me, I fear that thou wilt fall, or brambles mar thy innocent limbs, and I be cause of pain to thee. The region here is rough, through which thou hastenest. Run with less speed, I pray, and hold thy flight. I too will follow with less speed. Nay, stop, and ask who thy lover is. I am no mountain dweller, no shepherd, I, no unkempt guardian here of flocks and herds. Thou knowest not, rash one, thou knowest not whom thou fleest, and for that reason dost thou flee. Mine is the Delphian land, and Claros, Tenedos, and the realm of Patara acknowledge me as lord. Jove is my father. By me what shall be, has been, and what is, are all revealed. By me the lyre responds in harmony to song. My arrow is sure of aim, but oh, one arrow, surer than my own, has wounded my heart, but now so fancy-free. The art of medicine is my discovery. I am called help-bringer throughout the world, and all the potency of herbs is given unto me. Alas, that love is curable by no herbs, and the arts which heal all others cannot heal their lord. He would have said more, but the maiden pursued her frightened way, and left him with his words unfinished, even in her desertion seeming fair. The winds bared her limbs, the opposing breezes set her garments a-flutter as she ran, and a light air flung her locks streaming behind her. Her beauty was enhanced by flight. But the chase drew to an end, for the youthful god would not longer waste his time in coaxing words, and urged on by love, he pursued at utmost speed. Just as when a Gallic hound has seen a hare in an open plain, and seeks his prey on flying feet, but the hare safety. He, just about to fasten on her, now, even now, thinks he has her, and grazes her very heels with his outstretched muzzle. But she knows not whether or no she be already caught, and barely escapes from those sharp fangs, and leaves behind the jaws just closing on her. So ran the god and maid. He sped by hope, and she by fear. But he ran the more swiftly, borne on the wings of love, gave her no time to rest, hung over her fleeing shoulders, and breathed on the hair that streamed over her neck. Now was her strength all gone, and, pale with fear and utterly overcome by the toil of her swift flight, seeing her father's waters near, she cried, "Oh, Father, help! If your waters hold divinity, change and destroy this beauty by which I pleased all well." Scarce had she thus prayed, when a down-dragging numbness seized her limbs, and her soft sides were begirt with thin bark. Her hair was changed to leaves, her arms to branches, her feet, but now so swift, grew fast in sluggish roots, and her head was now but a tree's top. Her gleaming beauty alone remained. But even now in this new form Apollo loved her, and placing his hand upon the trunk, he felt the heart still fluttering beneath the bark. He embraced the branches as if human limbs, and pressed his lips upon the wood. But even the wood shrank from his kisses, and the god cried out to this, "Since thou canst not be my bride, thou shalt at least be my tree. My hair, my lyre, my quiver, shall always be entwined with thee, O laurel. With thee shall Roman generals wreathe their heads, when shouts of joy shall acclaim their triumph, and long processions climb the Capitol. Thou at Augustus' portals shalt stand a trusty guardian, and keep watch over the civic crown of oak which hangs between. And as my head is ever young, and my locks unshorn, so do thou keep the beauty of thy leaves perpetual." Paean was done. The laurel waved her new-made branches, and seemed to move her head-like top in full consent. There is a vale in Thessaly, which steep wooded slopes surround on every side. Men call it Tempe. Through this the river Peneus flows from the foot of Pindus with foam-flecked waters, and by its heavy fall forms clouds which drive along fine smoke-like mist, sprinkles the tops of the trees with spray, and deafens even remoter regions by its roar. Here is the home, the seat, the inmost haunt of the mighty stream. Here, seated in a cave of overhanging rock, he was giving laws to his waters and to his water-nymphs. Hither came first the rivers of his own country, not knowing whether to congratulate or console the father of Daphne. The poplar-fringed Percheos, the restless Enipeus, hoary Epidanas, gentle Amphisus, and Aeus. and later all the rivers which, by whatsoever way their current carries them, lead down their waters, weary with wandering, into the sea. Inachus only does not come, but, hidden away in his deepest cave, he augments his waters with his tears, and in utmost wretchedness laments his daughter Io as lost. He knows not whether she still lives or is among the shades, but since he cannot find her anywhere, he thinks she must be nowhere, and his anxious soul forebodes things worse than death. Now Jove had seen her returning from her father's stream, and said, "O maiden, worthy of the love of Jove, and destined to make some husband happy, seek now the shade of these deep woods." And he pointed to the shady woods, while the sun at his zenith's height is overwarm. "But if thou fearest to go alone amongst the haunts of wild beasts, under God's protection shalt thou tread in safety even the inmost woods. Nor am I of the common gods, but I am he who holds high heaven's sceptre in his mighty hand, and hurls the roaming thunderbolts. Oh, do not flee from me," for she was already in flight. Now had she left behind the pasture fields of Lerna, and the Lycian plains thick set with trees, when the god hid the wide land in a thick dark cloud, caught the fleeing maid, and ravished her. Meanwhile Juno chanced to look down upon the midst of Argos, and marvelled that quick rising clouds had wrought the aspect of night in the clear light of day. She knew that they were not river mists nor fogs exhaled from the damp earth, and forthwith she glanced around to see where her lord might be, as one who knew well his oft-discovered wiles. When she could not find him in the sky, she said, "Either I am mistaken, or I am being wronged." And gliding down from the top of heaven, she stood upon the earth and bade the clouds disperse. But Jove had felt beforehand his spouse's coming, and had changed the daughter of Inachus into a white heifer. Even in this form she still was beautiful. Saturnia looked awhile upon the heifer in grudging admiration, then asked whose she was, and whence she came, or from what herd, as if she did not know full well. Jove lyingly declared that she had sprung from the earth, that so he might forestall all further question as to her origin. Thereupon Saturnia asked for the heifer as a gift. What should he do? 'Twere a cruel task to surrender his love, but not to do so would arouse suspicion. Shame on one side prompts to give her up, but love on the other urges not. Shame by love would have been o'ercome, but if so poor a gift as a heifer were refused to her who was both his sister and his wife, perchance she had seemed to be no heifer. Though her rival was at last given up, the goddess did not at once put off all suspicion, for she feared Jove and further treachery until she had given her over to Argus, the son of Restor, to keep for her. Now Argus' head was set about with 100 eyes, which took their rest in sleep 2 at a time in turn, while the others watched and remained on guard. In whatsoever way he stood, he looked at Io. Even when his back was turned, he had Io before his eyes. In the daytime he allowed her to graze, but when the sun had set beneath the earth, he shut her up, and tied an ignominious halter round her neck. She fed on leaves of trees and bitter herbs, and instead of a couch the poor thing lay upon the ground, which was not always grassy, and drank water from the muddy streams. When she strove to stretch out suppliant arms to Argus, she had no arms to stretch, and when she attempted to voice her complaints, she only mooed. She would start with fear at the sound, and was filled with terror at her own voice. She came also to the bank of her father's stream, where she used to play, but when she saw, reflected in the water, her gaping jaws and sprouting horns, she fled in very terror of herself. Her Naiad sisters knew not who she was, nor yet her father, Inachus himself. But she followed him and her sisters, and offered herself to be petted and admired. Old Inachus had plucked some grass and held it out to her. She licked her father's hand and tried to kiss it. She could not restrain her tears, and if only she could speak, she would tell her name and sad misfortune, and beg for aid. But instead of words, she did tell the sad story of her changed form with letters which she traced in the dust with her hoof. "Ah, woe is me!" exclaimed her father Inachus. And, clinging to the weeping heifer's horns and snow-white neck, "Ah, woe is me! Art thou indeed my daughter, whom I have sought o'er all the earth? Unfound, a lighter grief wast thou than found. Thou art silent, and givest me back no answer to my words. Thou only heavest deep sighs, and what alone thou canst, thou dost moo in reply. I, in blissful ignorance, was preparing marriage rites for thee, and had hopes, first of a son-in-law, and then of grandchildren. But now from the herd must I find thee a husband, and from the herd must I look for grandchildren. And even by death I may not end my crushing woes. It is a dreadful thing to be a god, for the door of death is shut to me, and my grief must go on without end." As they thus wept together, star-eyed Argus separated them, and drove the daughter, torn from her father's arms, to more distant pastures. There he perched himself apart upon a high mountain-top, where at his ease he could keep watch on every side. But now the ruler of the heavenly ones can no longer bear these great sufferings of Io, and he calls his son, whom the shining Pleiad bore, and bids him do Argus to death. Without delay Mercury puts on his winged sandals, takes in his potent hand his sleep-producing wand, and dons his magic cap. And thus arrayed, the son of Jove leaps down from sky to earth, where he removes his cap and lays aside his wings. Only his wand he keeps. With this, in the character of a shepherd, through the sequestered country paths he drives a flock of goats, which he has collected as he came along, and plays upon his reed pipe as he goes. Juno's guardsman is greatly taken with the strange sound. "You there," he calls, "whoever you are, you might as well sit beside me on this rock, for nowhere is there richer grass for the flock, and you see that there is shade convenient for shepherds." So Atlas' grandson takes his seat, and fills the passing hours with talk of many things, and by making music on his pipe of reeds he tries to overcome those watchful eyes. But Argus strives valiantly against his slumberous languor, and, though he allows some of his eyes to sleep, still he continues to watch with the others. He asks also how the reed pipe came to be invented, for at that time it had but recently been invented. Then said the god, "On Arcadia's cool mountain slopes, among the wood nymphs who dwelt on Nonacris, there was one much sought by suitors. Her sister nymphs called her Syrinx. More than once she had eluded the pursuit of satyrs and all the gods who dwell either in the bosky woods or fertile fields. But she patterned after the Delian goddess in her pursuits, and above all in her life of maidenhood. When girt after the manner of Diana, she would deceive the beholder, and could be mistaken for Latona's daughter, were not her bow of horn, were not Diana's of gold. But even so she was mistaken for the goddess. One day Pan saw her as she was coming back from Mount Lycaeus, his head wreathed with a crown of sharp pine needles, and thus addressed her. It remains still to tell what he said, and to relate how the nymph, spurning his prayers, fled through the pathless wastes until she came to Ladon stream flowing peacefully along his sandy banks, how here, when the water checked her further flight, she besought her sisters of the stream to change her form, and how Pan, when now he thought he had caught Syrinx, instead of her held naught but marsh reeds in his arms, and while he sighed in disappointment, the soft air stirring in the reeds gave forth a low and complaining sound. Touched by this wonder, and charmed by the sweet tones, the god exclaimed, This union at least shall I have with thee. And so the pipes, made of unequal reeds, fitted together with a joining of wax, took and kept the name of the maiden. When Mercury was going on to tell this story, he saw that all those eyes had yielded and were closed in sleep. Straightway he checks his words, and deepens Argus' slumber by passing his magic wand over those sleep-faint eyes. And forthwith he smites with his hooked sword the nodding head just where it joins the neck, and sends it bleeding down the rocks, defiling the rugged cliff with blood. Argus, thou liest low. The light which thou hadst within thy many fires is all put out, and one darkness fills thy 100 eyes. Saturnia took these eyes and set them on the feathers of her bird, filling his tail with starlike jewels. Straightway she flamed with anger, nor did she delay the fulfilment of her wrath. She set a terror-bearing fury to work before the eyes and heart of her Grecian rival, planted deep within her breast a goading fear, and sent her fleeing in terror through all the world. Thou, O Nile, alone didst close her boundless toil. When she reached the stream, she flung herself down on her knees upon the river-bank. With head thrown back, she raised her face, which alone she could raise, to the high stars, and with groans and tears and agonized mooings she seemed to voice her griefs to Jove, and to beg him to end her woes. Thereupon Jove threw his arms about his spouse's neck, and begged her at last to end her vengeance, saying, "Lay aside all fear for the future. She shall never be source of grief to you again." And he called upon the Stygian pools to witness his oath. The goddess's wrath is soothed. Io gains back her former looks, and becomes what she was before. The rough hair falls away from her body, her horns disappear, her great round eyes grow smaller, her gaping mouth is narrowed, her shoulders and her hands come back, and the hoofs are gone, being changed each into 5 nails. No trace of the heifer is left in her, save only the fair whiteness of her body. And now the nymph, able at last to stand upon 2 feet, stands erect, yet fears to speak, lest she moo in the heifer's way, and with fear and trembling she resumes her long-abandoned speech. Now with fullest service she is worshipped as a goddess by the linen-robed throng. A son, Epaphus, was born to her, thought to have sprung at length from the seed of mighty Jove, and throughout the cities dwelt in temples with his mother. He had a companion of like mind and age, named Phaeton, child of the sun. When this Phaeton was once speaking proudly, and refused to give way to him, boasting that Phoebus was his father, the grandson of Inachus rebelled, and said, "You are a fool to believe all your mother tells you, and are swelled up with false notions about your father." Phaeton grew red with rage, but repressed his anger through very shame, and carried Epaphus' insulting taunt straight to his mother Clymene. "And that you may grieve the more, mother," he said, "I, the high-spirited, the bold of tongue, had no word to say. Ashamed am I that such an insult could have been uttered, and yet could not be answered. But do you, if I am indeed sprung from heavenly seed, give me a proof of my high birth, and justify my claims to divine origin." So spoke the lad, and threw his arms around his mother's neck, begging her by his own and Merop's life, by his sister's nuptial torches, to give him some sure token of his birth. Clymene, moved, it is uncertain whether by the prayers of Phaeton, or more by anger at the insult to herself, stretched out both arms to heaven, and turning her eyes on the bright sun, exclaimed, "By the splendor of that radiant orb which both hears and sees me now, I swear to you, my boy, that you are sprung from the sun, that being whom thou behold, that being who sways the world. If I speak not the truth, may I never see him more, and may this be the last time my eyes shall look upon the light of day." But it is not difficult for you yourself to find your father's house. The place where he rises is not far from our own land. If you are so minded, go there, and ask your question of the sun himself." Phaeton leaps up in joy at his mother's words, already grasping the heavens in imagination, and after crossing his own Ethiopia and the land of Ind lying close beneath the sun, he quickly comes to his father's rising place. End of Book 1.